Hi, it's Raghu from Mindrolling, back with a very special guest today, Nick Polizzi. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, and I was just telling, so Nick put together and directed this amazing movie called Sacred Science. And Nick and I were introduced, it's about a month ago or something like that, by a mutual friend. And I read all about the movie on the website. I did everything except watch the movie until we were going to have this podcast. I said, well, let's do a podcast about this. So I was telling him how much of a fool I was not to watch it before I even talked to you the first time. So, God, it's quite something. And I'm going to ask you to describe and all. But before we get to the movie, let's do a little description so people know what we are talking about. Just give me, one of your 3 or 4 liners so people get it like right away.
Elevator pitch.
Yeah.
We brought 8 people from around the world who are suffering from a variety of serious illnesses, including cancer, Parkinson's disease, Crohn's, diabetes, depression, and more, down into the middle of the Amazon jungle on the border of Brazil and Peru to work with indigenous medicines, ceremonies, practices of the shamans there, and see if these guys could succeed where modern medicine had failed.
There you go. Beautiful. Don't you have that down? So this is just a fantastic movie, and we're going to tell you where you can watch it, and as soon as we'll give you all the information on the website and all of that throughout this show. But it's important, other than the reality of some of the beauty of the story, of people going down to this area and working with these healers and these shaman. There's another reality that's a much bigger picture, which comes out in the movie, and I'll get you to talk about it, but it's certainly about what it is that we are soon not going to have available to us, basically. That these herbs can form, especially, you think of the most common thing, for instance, antibiotics are not working, and it's even in the Times, the New York Times. Yeah. We've got to find alternative sources, and it appears that botanists are finding herbs in nature that can do what it is that these chemical medicines can no longer do. So it's got that larger picture, which is makes it an important film in my mind. But what were you doing before this? Let's talk about that.
Oh man!
Well, stuff that.
Listen. I've made a couple other movies before this one with partners, and I fell into filmmaking. Really, I didn't go to film school. I fell into it when I was in my late 20s. Until then, I was a real estate investor. I was one of those guys who, you see this on the side of the road. You see like the yellow sign that says "We buy ugly houses," something like that. I was one of those guys. I got out of college. I was determined I wouldn't get an office job after a terrible internship that kind of traumatized me in college. I'm like, I'm going to work for myself. So I was a real estate investor for a while, and I managed to get out of real estate before the market crashed. And as I was sort of trying to figure out what I was going to do next, a friend of mine was making a film called The Tapping Solution, my buddy Nick Ortner, and he called me up. He's like, listen, we started making this film, and we need your help. It's just not going the way we want it to go. I know that you went to graphic design school. So I went to a graphic design school. He's like, I'm sure you're going to, he's like, you're the only person I know who's creative. Can you help me? And I'm like, I know how to use Photoshop. That's all I really know how to use. I'm like, you have a documentary that you want to have edited. He's like, it's better than what I have. He's like, can you please just come over and just take a look at this film and tell me what you think? And I ended up going over his house, and one thing led to another, and I took it over and directed it. And that was my beginning into documentary filmmaking. And it just so happened that it was in the alternative health space.
Okay, but tell me about the stuff that even made you think that you'd be interested in such a thing, and beyond healing into the world of the spirit.
Well, so it's kind of it's kind of a Pandora's box, but what I came to realize was my introduction into these cultures and into this lineage of healing was something that happened to me when I was 16 that I didn't really attach any importance to, or didn't really think was much more than a dumb accident. I was out in my driveway when I was 16 after breaking up with my girlfriend, and I was sitting outside in the pouring rain, like, lamenting and, being emotional about this whole terrible thing that had kind of befallen me. And it was in the middle of a thunderstorm, and I skipped right to the chase. I got hit by lightning underneath my basketball hoop.
Okay, that might do something to.
And I was kind of in trouble with my parents a lot at that point. I'd done a lot of terrible things that year. I crashed the car 6 times and all kinds of other things that were causing them a headache. So when that happened, and like literally the big oak tree that was next to our hoop was split down the side and like all over our driveway, and I came to sort of next to it. My first inclination was to hide that fact. I'm like, they do not need to know that I was outside near this terrible thing that happened, and my body hurt, and I was shook up a little bit, but I didn't want to tell them because I was like, this will be the next thing in the catalog of terrible things that Nick has done this year. So let's just keep that quiet. So kept that quiet for a long time, and then it wasn't until I was in the jungle, hanging out with 3 shamans during a rainstorm one time where that story came up, and they were like, "Oh, that happened when you were 16? That's interesting." So that was, I guess, probably one of the early beginnings of my spirit path for sure.
Wow. That'll light you up, I guess, right away. Even more big time than ayahuasca or acid or something. Oh, yeah. Boy. All right. So, talk about, let's define sacred science.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 things with that. It's a tricky title. It's catchy, I know, because of just the feedback we get on, from our fans and social media. It seems to be something that people resonate with. But the actual beginnings of the origins of that title are from this concept in the Amazon. It's a shamanic concept. It's something that isn't really talked about very much. Something that I learned in my trips down there. There's sort of this notion of this, ciencia sagrada. It's like this, it's the science. It's the science of the indefinable. It's sort of this lineage that's been passed word of mouth from generation to generation. It's something that is not about like, oh, here are these 3 herbs you mix together and this is what it's good for. Like that's amazing, and that's amazing knowledge. But there's this way of being. It's something that you can only learn from being taught by a teacher and being taught by the elder who came before you. It's a way of being. They call it a lineage of direct transmission. It's something that can't be read in a book. It can't be learned from a movie. It has to be experienced by being with the person, by being with the healer. It's a sacred. So the sacred science, or ciencia sagrada, there's something deeper than just the herbs or the ceremonies. There's something that can only be acquired by being in the presence of someone and understanding how they are interfacing with the world around them.
And how they do interface with the world around them is quite prominent in the movie that shows you this is way beyond herbs. It's a complete spirit body, for sure. And so one of the first things you see in the film, or who you meet in the film, is Roman. Is he Spanish?
He's actually from Moldova.
Moldova.
Originally, and he came and he lived in Israel for a number of years, and then his family moved to Brooklyn, New York, and that was where he started experiencing the terrible health challenges that he had with Crohn's disease when he was in his teens. And then he went down to the jungle when he was in his late teens, right around 20 years old. I went down to the jungle just because he was called to go, and never came back. And within a year and a half, I think I'm pretty sure it was within a year and a half he had healed his Crohn's disease. It took a lot. It was, it changed him in many ways. He was in seclusion, in solitude for 8 months. doing nothing but, dieting plants and sitting in ceremonies. And at one point there was a shift that happened within him during one particular ceremony where he felt this intense pain and heating up in his gut where the Crohn's obviously is located. And it got almost unbearable. And then something switched. And then, the next day, most of the pain was gone, and then it just completely continued to recede from there. So he was somebody who was the reason why he left, I believe, and I don't want to misrepresent his story here, but the reason I've talked to him many times about this. The reason why he left was because they wanted to remove large parts of his intestine. They were going to start removing large parts of his intestine because he had so many holes and lesions. They said that it was going to be, it was something that would probably he would probably die early from, because he had such an intense case of it. And so he said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that to myself, and I'm going to try to find another way. And that's how he got on his path.
Wow. Because he's a very interesting guy. He's very multidimensional and seems to have some real, I call actuated wisdom, that he's had this substantial practice that he's been doing to activate that. So it's more actuated. Yeah. So he's pretty something in this. So he tell a little bit of the story. So he is the progenitor of the compound where people go to do this. So how did that? He quickly rose through the ranks, so to speak, or got the trust of the healers, right?
Yeah. So when I decided that I was going to make the film I wanted to make, which is what happened after the first two films, I was like, okay, so this is cool. I've made these two films. They're pretty successful. What do I want to make now? I don't want to have, now that I can make one for myself, what do I want to make? And so I was called towards, indigenous healing traditions. And then from there called towards Amazonian shamanism. It was really interesting, and I'm sure you've experienced this many times. Like, it feels like when you're on this path, when you're heading in the right direction, because the synchronicities start piling up. And so, for me, when I was first thing I obviously wanted to do was start working with shamans in the jungle, and figure out who would be the one I could trust. And during that time, that research, time, going down to the jungle and doing all the laying the framework for this thing, 3 of my friends who don't know each other each pointed me towards one person. They knew that I was going down there and seeking out different healers. And 3 of my friend Mark from Colorado, my friend Cynthia from California, and I forgot who else. One other person from the New York area pointed me towards this guy who they'd heard of, who, would come through every once in a while, and, he would give talks, and then, if you knew the right people, you could sort of, come to these talks. And I was like, okay, who is this person? It seems like this is the same person. And it ended up being Roman. So, that was an interesting point in the right direction during that research phase. And then he and I started, working together well before he agreed to do any filming. He wanted to, the first thing we did was sit in probably the most intense ayahuasca ceremony of my entire life, where he just wanted to. I was sitting with a bunch of much more advanced seekers, sitters, who had done this many times, who were in a group of people that had known him for years, and he invited me there to this one ceremony, and it was almost too much it felt like it was almost too much for me to hold on during it. It was really eye opening, but I think for him, and he says it now, he's like, I needed to be able to see you. And so, yeah, I invited you to an intense ceremony where I knew the medicine was from an old vine. And we would be taking something else extra with it, which is this stuff they call candy. It's in these jars of ayahuasca, over the course of months of traveling with this stuff, this sediment, this stuff starts kind of forming on the bottom, and it's sort of it looks, and it tastes kind of like caramel. It doesn't taste like caramel, but it looks and feels like caramel. It tastes unpleasant. But so yeah, that was an intense ceremony, and that was when I sort of came to grips with the real work that I needed to do in this life, And the idea of making the film was pretty much, not even there for me for at least, 2 or 3 days. And that was really more for me to go through my stuff. And then later on afterwards, when I came back into, trying to understand what my path was and what my mission was, Roman was like, hey, by the way, if you want to make the film, I'll make it with you. We'll do it. He's like, I see what you're doing. I understand who you are now. And I understand that you're doing this for the right reasons. And there's integrity here. So if we can, let's move forward if you want to. So that was how it went.
Wow. And at that point, though, he was running this compound or whatever, clinic, whatever you might call it.
No, he wasn't. At that point, where was he living at that point? He was living in the Sacred Valley outside of Cusco in a little town called Pisac. He had a small place in the jungle, I believe, at that point too. But the compound that you saw in the film, we made it together. That didn't exist. That didn't exist until the film actually. So when we started planning the film, we're like, okay, so we want to have 8 patients come down. Let's build a traditional healing center, Amazonian healing center, where there's dieta huts where people will be in seclusion, half a mile from each other, so that they're covered in, with plenty of space to do their work, and then a few longhouses and that kind of a thing. So we found some land and we built it. And that's what you see in the film. And now that's become a healing center. It's ever since the film was shot, it's now a healing center. And there's another one that's being built right now, in a different region, of the Amazon, about 5 hours east of Cusco, over the Andes Mountains, right where the Andes drop off into the Amazon. It's pretty gorgeous, amazing location as well.
Wow. That and this is all under his auspices in terms of running this whole deal?
Yep.
Pretty amazing.
Him and his partner, Cynthia, they're pretty amazing people. And the people who they have working with them, they find some pretty incredible people. I mean, a lot of them have come through, watching our film, people who want to know what they can do, how they can go down to the Paititi Institute. And a lot of them it's just word of mouth. There's a pretty amazing community, coming together around these ancient medicines and the messages that they have to show us. So pretty extraordinary.
Wonderful. How did you get these 8 people to, what kind of trust did you establish to get them to come down there, Nick?
They were from the other 2 films. They were, from the Tapping Solution film is all about that takes 10 people who are ill, and they use a healing technique called EFT. So there was that community. Then the next one was called Simply Raw, Reversing Diabetes in 30 Days. So there's all kinds of people on that mailing list in that community that were excited about and needing some answers for some nutritional answers for their illness. So those 2, we went out to those 2 communities, and within 24 hours I had 400 applications for people. And it was pretty honest and flat out, like, listen, here's what you're gonna have to face. It wasn't like we were trying to, get people to get interested in trying to sell this to anyone. We're like, hey, if you're really ill and you feel like, you're looking for new options, and you're willing to brave, the rainforest, and, willing to, work with indigenous medicines, ceremonies, and all the things that entails, then send us an email and let us know who you are and fill out this application. So after, within 24 hours, I had 400 plus applications for people, and incredible people, a lot of them really, really, sick. Yeah. And we had to figure out, it was such a hard it's weird. I don't think about this very often, but it was just such a hard process that, people, just beautiful human beings, just, they had to come in, they had to send in a headshot. They had to fill out all kinds of stuff about themselves. So we got to really, get to know who these people were. There were 5 of us going through these applications. So we were sitting there with 400 applications. We need 8 people. And it's like, how are we going to whittle this down? So the first thing I did was, I'm like, okay, let me just reiterate to them what they're going to have to go through, and so I sent out another email a few days later saying, hey, thank you so much for your application. I just want to make sure you understand where we're going to be. This is not a first world facility.
It's not the Chopra Center. It wasn't.
It's not the Chopra Center. It's not, and I was like, so, because people had seen like the healing center in Simply Raw, which is really nice, the Tree of Life Healing Center in Sedona. I'm like, this is nothing like any of that. There's no electricity. The running water is very limited. You're going to be in seclusion, like literally seclusion. There's not like you're going to be, in sort of a vipassana where you're like wandering around, not talking, but still seeing each other. You will be in a dieta hut and in the remote, the 10 feet radius of that dieta hut for the majority of this time, unless you're walking out of this dieta hut to go to the maloca ceremonial temple to do ceremony, and then coming back into your dieta hut. And also, I want to make sure you understand that there are poisonous snakes and there are poisonous spiders that live in this region, along with the thousands and thousands of other creatures that crawl around here. Well, that got rid of about 60% of people. They had to respond that they wanted to be considered. So I mean, if they didn't respond, then they were not on the list anymore. So that sort of whittled it down to maybe 180 people, and then from there we just personally called everyone and started getting real good intel on who they were, and then we made the final decision from there.
Amazing. Jesus. Unreal. It's so beautiful in the film. You really get a chance to sort of know these people because they're in such a critical space, and they're way more real, and everything they're doing that's supporting this space. And it's a retreat as well as all of the herbs that they're taking and the ceremonies they're going through. It's just it's pretty amazing. So there's a few things that I heard in the film that I thought it would be great to bring up. I thought that they were really insightful. One of the things, I don't know, and I think I can't remember exactly who says what when, but probably the shaman who are quoted throughout the film, and that's a fantastic thing as well. You get to really feel, okay, these aren't guys they're doing it for the real reasons as well. But one of the things that they're trying to do, they said, is to help people get out of their patterns, to give them a real chance to die.
Yeah.
That is a phenomenal thing, and it very much falls in line with, if you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead or Sogyal Rinpoche's book, Living and Dying, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which, by the way, anybody out there who's got anybody who's in any kind of compromised spot in terms of they may be very sick or getting close to transition, that's a great book for them to have. But it's let's talk about that. What is it to you?
For me, I feel like, the first inclination would be to think about it in terms of these patients and the real, very real confrontation with their own mortality that they're in the middle of. But I think that sense, just to take it on, to bring it into my own personal, understanding, I feel like it means to me this idea that dying is not necessarily something that is associated solely with the passing on from this physical body. I think that these patients all have to go through a dying process, and this path in general, the shamanic path, the spirit path, the indigenous healing path, requires you to let go of parts of yourself that are no longer serving you and let them die off. I mean, I've heard the analogy so many times. This idea of a tree reaching for the sun, reaching for the light, is going to let limbs die that are no longer helping it. And it's a beautiful thing, but it's not something that necessarily needs to be mourned, or maybe it does. The idea of letting our parts of ourselves die that no longer serve us, I think, is at the heart of what's going on in the film. It's at the heart of what's been going on in my little world ever since I came into contact with these traditions. Mm. So there is obviously also, the physical dying, and the physical dying of these bodies that we inhabit, which I think is also is also very relevant
Yeah.
to that statement. So,
Yeah. Isn't it funny that it takes us being in that kind of critical situation, obviously related to our mortality, before we really allow ourselves to get free of these habitual patterns that are the things that very much contribute to our being, shall we say, off base, and off base physically, emotionally, mentally. And one would, which is all the lamas, for instance, say, get going on that now, like way before you'll be so compromised you can't even deal with it. You can't even go through a ceremony, for instance. And I love the other statement around this same thing was around encountering negative seeds that have been planted. Have we planted a few negative seeds in our lives? So that's great too. The other thing that's interesting, not interesting, it's a reality, and that's about ayahuasca. In my mind, and this is just personal, and I'm not involved in the ayahuasca ceremonies at all, but I feel just knowing people and having worked with people or talked to people that there seems to be a penchant for over abuse of ayahuasca. And it becomes something that is just, let me have that experience again and again. And I think, Maharaji Neem Karoli Baba, from Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now. And the famous thing is when he was given acid and nothing happened, and there was a lot of fun stuff that happened. But what he did say was, it's good in the beginning. It allows you to know Christ, but you can only hang out for a few hours, and then you got to leave. Eventually, just love, serve, remember will get you where you want to go. That pretty much is what he said. So to me, that in terms of our practical reality, I feel like, of course, everything can be abused if it's done in excess, but there seems to be an experiential level to ayahuasca that brings people back and back and back, and I wonder, what is the reality of them in terms of the deepest transformation of a being? So that's my thing about ayahuasca. Then I heard one of the shaman in the film say, ayahuasca, and this is no secret, is the mother of all plants. And the only way that we have found these other plants that are these healing plants is through ayahuasca. So that probably harks back, okay, well, the right person using these shaman, quote unquote, is, that's a whole other level of this. It's not, Joe Schmo coming from Brooklyn to the Amazon to have another experience. What's your take on all of that?
So I guess there's it's a two-parter, I think. Yeah. So the first one, I've seen people in ceremonies that I can tell are not evolving, that I've seen in ceremony. I mean, only because I've seen them in ceremonies for the last 7 or 8 years, and I know them. I personally can't do very many ayahuasca ceremonies, and when I do them, between you and I'm scared. I mean, I'm always scared. I can't, it's not something that's a joyride for me. I know some people talk about it like, I went into the mouth of the serpent and went in and for me, it's an ordeal. I mean, it's a saga every time. And so it's something that, I think that certain people are, and you could look at it energetically, spiritually, physically wired towards certain types of plants. And some plants are, full on allies, and, they can harness that power and really dance in that space. And other plants, I think, for that same person might bring them to their knees. So that's a lesson that I've learned in my experiences with Amazonian medicine, is that some plants you'd think are, going to present the same effects across the board for everyone. And it's just totally not true. For me, ayahuasca is something that I respect. It's probably the most powerful thing I've ever worked with plant medicine wise, but it's definitely not something I look forward to whenever, those days leading up to it. I'm thinking about it, it's in the back of my brain, it's almost like, the only thing I can really think about, I can liken it to is if you know you have to give, a big, very important presentation to, a large audience of people that really matter, or like deliver a eulogy for someone who is really important to you in front of a something where you feel like all eyes are going to be on you, and you're going to have to do an 8 to 9 hour marathon, is what I feel, ayahuasca is for me. So I can't relate to the idea of overindulging in it, because I literally don't think I'm chemically, physically, spiritually wired to be able to. That's just not who I am. But I have seen people in ceremonies, who am I to judge anyone? But I think that in my inclination is that they are people who don't seem to be gaining more compassion, more connectedness through the repeated ceremonies. And these are folks that take it twice a month, and I'm somebody who does it once a year, maybe. And actually sometimes it's like once every year and a half. And it's because it's part of my path. I mean, I know I have to do it, but it's something that is definitely, is scary for me. Now to go back. So I think that I agree with you. I think that there are some people that this is not necessarily helpful for, in terms of continued repeated use. It isn't like the more you indulge, the more healing you get. I think that it's like anything. This is all about you. It's your own work. It's being in touch with the subtlety of your own journey, and there is nobody else who's going to do this for you. It's almost like you can liken it to people just kind of, sitting back, coming down with some kind of illness and then going straight to the hospital, sitting back and saying, "Hey, just put me under, just take care of what you got to take care of, and I'll go back home and not think about it anymore." Like, you can't do that. There's no one who's going to do this work for you. And something that Roman's taught me and continues to try to ingrain in me, and only recently have I fully started to understand it, is just that there is no end to this. There is no winning this game. The game, the path, the destination is the work. There is nothing more. It's the work is where you're going. The work is not what you need to do before you get somewhere. The work is where you're going. And it's about you to fully embracing that and learning how to dance in that space, in the space of self-reflection, understanding, openness, subtlety, connectedness that you need to be constantly doing. And so for me, I thought that there was this place where you do the work and finally you get spit out the other side, and then you're
enlightened.
It's easy. And then it's easy. But so anyway, in answer to the second part to your question, I've experienced some really cool things in the jungle, just witnessing different shamans who use the ceremonies to locate the plants that they're using to prescribe to their patients. So there's in the movie, there's one of the shamans. His name is Don Habib. His name is what's his name? His name is Don Pachin. Sorry, there's so many: Don Pachin, Habib, Eduardo, and Roman. But Don Pachin, and he's quiet. He's a quieter one, and he in ceremony a lot of times he just almost lays down. He just kind of takes medicine, and then he won't be administering any healings. He won't be singing any icaros. He just lays down sometimes, or he'll be against the wall and just kind of be gone. And so for a while I was like, Roman, this guy's not really very impressive. Like, he just drinks the medicine and he doesn't even participate in the ceremony. He's like, what's going on here? Is this guy really into, just doing it for the thrill ride? And I'm like, why do we, I think we might've made a mistake. And Roman was like, why don't you ask him what he's doing when he's in the ceremony? And so the next day, he's casually, I think it might even, a clip of it might have been in the film, but casually asked him. I didn't want to offend him. I was like, so what? I noticed that you're sort of not really there in the ceremony. You're somewhere else. You're not in the room with us. And he just kind of explained to me that, every healer is different. And for him, the way he finds his medicines is he has to go out of body. The only way he knows the medicines to prescribe is through ceremony. And so he during that experience is scanning the jungle, wandering through the jungle, in his energy body, and he's looking for the right plants for his patients. Now, you can believe everyone can believe what they want to believe, but I do know this: the plants that he prescribes work, in terms of the symptoms going away that the patient's experiencing. And he's not some exception, or this isn't like a new concept. This is something that's talked about quite a bit in the Amazon, is using these ceremonies to find the medicine for your patients. A lot of these guys don't even know what the plants are called that they're prescribing. They're just like, these are the plants that I know I know you need to take. So.
Wow. Is he the one with the son, young guy that's his apprentice?
That's Eduardo. Yeah.
Well, that kid is phenomenal too. I mean, you see him through the picture working with his father, and you almost think, this poor kid has got to do this thing because his dad told him he got to do it. You go collect some of this, do that. He's like a gopher, a healer gopher. Then he starts to talk, this kid, and it was like, wait a minute, he's unbelievable. He said one thing actually that was just staggering. He says, I just want to continue my training so that I can eventually see my true nature. I mean, I don't know who translated that from the Spanish. Did you? Okay, true nature?
I translated a lot of it, but I think something like true nature. Yeah, I think, it was me and two other translators that know Peruvian Spanish even better than I do. So, I could listen to it again, but I think that's pretty much word for word. So,
I mean, this is like central Buddhist concept coming from, how old is he? He was 12, 13, 14, something.
Yeah, something like that. I think he actually might have been older. He might have been a little older than he looked. I think he might have been 15 or 16.
Oh God, he's really old. Then how could he have said that? I mean, just imagine that coming out of his mouth.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, this transmission and that is going on in this particular case, to me, that was a highlight of the film. And he said, and you showed some scenes, just of this in the city of kids. They're not the least bit. He said this generation isn't the least bit interested in anything like this. And then you start to think, holy shit, it's succession. What's going to happen? I mean, there's one thing is the plants not being there because of the continuing horror, but also the people that aren't able to interest this next generation. So is that not a large part of what's going on here and what you're trying to get across with this film?
This film there's so many little through lines on this film. I think that is one of them for sure. There's a crisis in the jungle, and there's a crisis really around the world in, the different healing traditions, shamanic traditions, where the youngsters are no longer really interested in learning from the elders anymore. And these traditions are almost every one of them is not written down. There is no written language. There is no written language in the Amazon. So when that elder dies with that knowledge inside of him or her, without sharing it with someone who can continue it, then it's gone. But whatever that person knows, that could be thousands of years old, handed down until just recently. If that knowledge is not passed on, not only the knowledge, but that, like we were saying before, like that sacred science, that way of being, then it's lost. So yeah, it's Mark Plotkin speaks about it really, really eloquently, and he's got a book called Medicine Hunters, I believe. Is it called Medicine Hunters?
Yeah, we should look that up.
Medicine Quest. Sorry, it's called Medicine Quest.
Medicine Quest.
Yep. And
yeah, we'll get that up on the website, everybody, as well.
Medicine Hunters, another gentleman named Chris Killam, who's really cool. He's a friend of ours. He does a lot of work in the Amazon too. Mark
Plotkin.
Mark Plotkin. He's actually Plotkin, P as in Peter, Lotkin. He's got a really great conservation organization called the Amazon Team. If you ever saw that movie in the late 80s with Sean Connery, it's called Medicine Man.
Yes.
That movie is modeled after Mark. Mark also gave a really great TED talk a year ago, talking kind of about the biodiversity of the Amazon and what we need to do to save it. But he's he and a bunch of other ethnobotanists, they speak really beautifully about the crisis and not just being a crisis of losing the plants and losing the jungle, but of losing the really rich and valuable, if you want to think about it from like a medical perspective, knowledge and wisdom that these traditions have. Every time those kids get lured into modernity, which I'm not saying is bad, that's just the way that's just how things are flowing. It's how things are evolving. But one casualty of that is the loss of this knowledge, and it's a big one.
It's a big casualty, big time. The other thing that struck me in the movie is the fact that it's not just it's not just focused on the body healing, and that it is very much focused on soul healing, whatever you want to call that. And there's different methodologies that take place. That you hear Om Mani Padme Hum chanting, at one point. So there's chanting going on. There's obviously meditation. Obviously the ayahuasca ceremony itself is a center piece of this. So I imagine whoever goes there is told that that's something that's part of the healing process. So if you're completely against taking a psychotropic substance, then you can't come, right?
Every one of the patients who came down knew that there would be ayahuasca ceremonies, and they said they were comfortable with that. But not all the patients participated in them when they were down there.
Oh, really?
It wasn't mandatory. If patients were resistant to it, it wasn't mandatory. And I think it touches on something that I talk about a lot after the film, after screenings of the film. We do Q&As, is that people sometimes feel as though when they watch the movie that a lot of the healing comes from the herbs in the ceremonies, but the underlying medicine that's happening there is the jungle itself, and not really just the jungle itself, like, oh, the trees healed me, but the seclusion in the jungle itself, like the actual way that this whole thing is put together in Amazonian healing, where this person needs to sit in this hut by themselves for 30 days. If you do nothing more than just all you do is sit in a hut for 30 days by yourself, eating pretty much mostly vegan food. There's a small fish called the boca chico, which is like a traditional part of the Amazonian healing dieta. It's the only animal protein that's allowed in the diet. I'm not sure exactly why. It's not a very nice tasting fish. It's very tiny and bony. It's not like something that you'd really want to eat. But eating very minimal food, very minimal, simple food, no seasoning, no spices, at all whatsoever. A little bit of salt, a tiny little bit of salt. But you're sitting in seclusion by yourself for 30 straight days on this very humble diet that's really only for sustenance. There's nothing enjoyable about what you're eating. All you have is yourself. And it's funny because the patients that came down, when we told them, listen, you're not going to be able to have anything in your hut. Like, it's just going to be your clothes and a little, the medicines that you're going to be given, and some water, and a little bit of food that you might be given in the morning, and that's it.
No books.
These people. Yeah, no, but these people came down and they're like, well, surely you're not saying that my book about, whatever it is, it could be the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It could be anything. You're not telling me I can't bring this with me. This is sacred. Or you're going to tell me I can't bring this pad of paper I have to take notes or to draw pictures, or this coloring book where I can color in these mandalas. Nope, all that stuff, we're taking it. What are we going to do? Yeah, exactly. What are you going to do? You're here for a reason, and just trust us. This is going to work. This is going to help you. So it's funny. People think that and some people even thought that they would be able to have their iPhones with them because they said, "Oh, I have music on that. I'm not going to use it for any other reason." Who are they going to call? They're like 3,000 miles away from anywhere. But it's funny. People need these distractions, and there's so many justifications for the distractions. I mean, I find myself doing it all the time, justifying why I need to indulge in the thing that I need to indulge in. Yeah, exactly. And it's our way of hiding from ourselves, right? Yeah. It's our way of hiding from what's actually going on. So I guess my point is, the ceremonies are a big part of Amazonian healing, but I think that it can't be understated how important this idea of getting rid of everything that you have that is taking you away from yourself
You get into a big be here now moment, don't you, on that? Well, that's and once you go through something like that, aside from the obvious the people going down to get healed, but that other healing that happens, and once you see that, and then you see it way more clearly in your day-to-day life, back wherever that might be. So yeah, that's why I appreciated that. I didn't expect that in the movie. I mean, this Roman guy he's pretty good. Learn to see the highest wisdom in everything that's happening to you, and that harks back to Maharaji Neem Karoli said to us, "See everything for the good." So, getting into that kind of a place, if that's all that you could do, that would be a huge, huge, huge thing. Living in acceptance and some kind of contentment. There's one other thing that's nothing to do with the movie, okay? It's just something I actually saw on a blog, and I'm like, wow. Oh, God. Hang on a second. You did a blog, and you met someone named Laurie Gerber, a life coach.
Yeah.
This is recent. I don't think it's that long ago.
It isn't.
And you were striving to find balance, with your work and your life.
Yeah.
And everybody's trying to do that.
Yep.
Here's a little ad. We just put out a smartphone app called Heart Mind. And in it, that's why this struck me, because in it, we curated an in-app course called Life in Balance. How to get yourself in balance on a day-to-day basis, from Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg, Krishnadas Ram, all the people that are on the Be Here Now network, which Mindrolling is on. And so there you are. I was like, okay, he went to this life coach, and then, you really 5 hours of written homework detailing all areas of my life, visions, history, parents, and more. And,
yep.
and okay, so this has nothing to do with anything, but I had to get clear on what my dream relationship to time in capitals would be, and give it a current rating on a scale of 1 to 10. What are we talking about? I just got to know this. Okay.
I think it's great that you want to end on this. It's great. So yeah, Laurie's actually, so she works for a company called the Handel Group out of New York, and she was recommended to me by a friend. And I was like, at first, I had all my projections were like, this seems like something that can't possibly be transformative, or, that's not along the lines of the work you're doing, in these different cultures. But gosh, man, the way that the knowledge that I have gotten from Laurie, just, she's a coach. She spends her entire day with people who have pretty sizable, communities. They work with, whether or not it's some sort of a tech company that they feel they're aligned with, that they feel it has like an altruistic sort of, mission, or whether it's like speakers, authors, and things like that. So they reached out to me and they're like, hey, we want to see if we could help you with anything that's going on with you trying to juggle this, messaging around the sacred science, and also live your life, the way you should in the modern world. And I was like, all right, let's talk. So we talked, and really what we do, what Laurie and I do, is just talking about how I can embody the person I am when I'm in the jungle, even when I'm walking on my path up here in the United States, trying to run a business. I mean, really, the sacred science, it's like, this is a film, but, there's a community here that we have a big team. We have big projects that we're doing, down in the jungle and up here in the States. And it's really like running an organization. So, it's something that people might not think when they're like, when they watch the film, or, they read our blogs, or, work with our mastery programs, but it really is something that has been a goal of mine. It's like, okay, so I'm sort of, there's two different parts of my life. There is Nick, who's, walking barefoot down the jungle trail, honestly, would rather be nowhere else in the world pretty much at all times than in that place. Or there's also Nick, who's like the man who's got a 4-year-old son and wife and kids and a mortgage, and trying to provide not only for myself but also for the people who are in my organization and them and their families too. So I mean, there's that kind of a balance, and so that's where Laurie comes in. And I gotta say, like, she's been extremely helpful. A lot of the wisdom that they work with in the Handel group is actually pretty shamanic and ancestral in nature, and that's where that came from. So yeah, my dream relationship with time. I've never thought about that kind of a thing. It sounds kind of like a gimmicky self-help kind of a drill to do, but when you're working with them and they're really trying to help you understand the pitfalls that you can encounter in the modern world when trying to walk a spirit path. Your relationship to time is one of those. I don't know, big factors that you need to take into consideration. How do you want to be spending every hour of your day? Instead of it's not just like I wake up and I'm in my marmot tent in like a cloud forest, somewhere, in the high Andes, and I get to kind of figure out what I want to do first. Do I want to chew some coca, or do I want to, go wander down across the bridge and see what's going on down there with the other permaculturists? I have to like think about, okay, so I wake up in the morning, crack of dawn, and then I'm a dad for 2 hours, and then I go to the office, and then I have to work with my team. And how does that all work? What's my energy throughout all that? How can I make that something that feels like it's more in alignment with my highest ideals? And
sure.
that's that. Yeah.
Yeah. Universal question. Everyone has that. Now that I understand exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Dream relationship to time. Yes. And, and at center of this movie, the core of healing of body, healing of spirit, and staying in for 30 days completely alone and just having very simple food and herbs and practices would bring you to the place where your perspective completely changes, so that when you are in the world, so to speak, then you are not being pulled into your habitual patterns. It goes back to what we were talking about right in the beginning, right? That you've let them out enough so that they can dissipate and you can transform, so that wherever you are, there is that moment. So that's pretty beautiful. Okay, we got to talk about sacred science. Okay, where can people go? Go to the site and tell us what's going on. You have a cookbook too that you've got going.
Yeah, we have a free screening happening right now, and it's going to be going for quite a few more. So it ends on Sunday. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more days. People can watch it.
Since we're podcasts will come out after the 5 days, and so let's go into a broader thing of how people can access.
Easy, very easy. Same basic thing, but so I'll just start where. Okay, I know I'll start. So we have a free screening for the Sacred Science that you can check out online. Just go to thesacredscience.com, thesacredscience.com/screening.html, and that will take you to a registration page. Give us your information. We will send you links to watch the movie. There's also a cookbook, as you mentioned, that's filled with ancient recipes that heal. The criteria for that book was we needed to find recipes that were over 500 years old and that had proven healing power. So that's the Sacred Cookbook that you can check out as well when you're watching the movie. It's somewhere on that screen. And if you grab a copy, you'll be supporting us. So you can also grab a copy of the film itself. And that obviously goes to supporting the work that we do. So yeah, we'd love to have you and hear your feedback.
And if anybody is interested, Nick, in actually going down into the Amazon and just wanting to participate in this healing, is that possible through contact through your site?
We don't really do much with that. We try to direct people to do their own research. There are a lot of facilities through our site. You will see articles that talk about different facilities down in the Amazon that you could seek out. But we're trying really hard to dissuade people from flocking to the Amazon to get to have a healing experience. It's kind of a fine line we dance with this film project, is showing people what's possible. But really what we're trying to do is empower people to bring some of these core practices back into their life, the same kinds of practices that you and I have been speaking about today, the mindfulness practices. And, on our website, you'll see a pretty thriving blog where we distill a lot of what you saw in the film into things that you can do in your own life. Whether it's prayer, whether it's small rites of passage and ceremonies that you can do for yourself, herbs that you can easily access up here in the States. So we don't really recommend different centers in the Amazon because, I guess, for two reasons. One, I don't want to vouch for healers down there. Roman's amazing, but he's not someone who has a shingle hung where you can go and see him. And there's many amazing healers, but we don't want to guarantee anyone's experience for themselves up here. So,
okay, got it, fair. So, but certainly supporting, watching the movie, certainly supporting what's going on is important. I'm sure that there's also a way through sacred science to actually directly support keeping the tradition alive. That would be the most important thing in my mind. So, sacred science. Nick Polizzi, thank you. It was really great, but finally watching the movie was way greater, actually. Not that I don't love you.
But hey, listen, I'm excited that you watched it and you liked it.
Yeah, it was really wonderful. Really wonderful. Get a lot of food for thought. A lot. And go to the site, Sacred Science, The Sacred Science.
The Sacred
Science. Go to thesacredscience.com and just participate. Sign up there, and Nick produces not only wonderful blogs that I've been reading, but also great interviews, which actually we're going to start putting up here on the Be Here Now network, right? So, and we'll see more of you, Nick. So thank you again. This is Mindrolling on the Be Here Now network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling, and we shall see you next week.